Dark, wet, and claustrophobic, caves are the last place anyone expects a rescue drama. But from Thailand to Tennessee to Germany, a few explorers faced the unthinkable and were saved by unwavering courage and expert teams, ready to descend into 3 survival stories that push the limits. Let's go. Tam Luang Cave Rescue. It began as a simple, spirited adventure, one that would capture the attention of the world. On the afternoon of June 23, 2018, 12 members of the Wild Boars football team, all boys aged between 11 and 16, along with their 25-year-old assistant coach, entered the Tam Luang Nang Non Cave in northern Thailand. It was supposed to be a post-practice excursion, the kind of light-hearted bonding activity that turns into a shared memory. They'd been in before, exploring its winding passages, and this was meant to be nothing more than another playful trek. But the cave had a different plan. Tam Luang is vast, stretching nearly 10 kilometers underground, a complex network of limestone chambers and twisting corridors that rise and fall like the chest of a sleeping giant. On that particular day, dark clouds were building above the forest canopy. The monsoon season was approaching, and with it, the rains that could turn these tunnels into dangerous waterways. While the group was inside, those rains came. Slowly at first, then relentlessly, water began seeping and rushing into the cave, filling low-lying passages. The boys and their coach, finding their intended route back blocked, retreated deeper inside to avoid the rising flood. The limestone walls echoed with the sound of rushing water, and soon, their only escape was cut off entirely. They found themselves on a small, elevated ledge, huddled together in darkness, with no food, no fresh water, and no idea when or if they might be found. When the boys failed to return home that evening, worried parents contacted authorities. Local police went to the cave, quickly realizing the group was trapped somewhere inside. Thai Navy SEALs were called in, along with experienced local cavers. But the problem was immediate. By the time rescuers entered, large sections of the cave were already submerged, and the water levels were still rising. Strong currents churned through narrow, jagged corridors, creating a perilous environment even for elite divers. News of the situation spread rapidly, drawing caving experts, rescue specialists, and divers from around the world. The operation would soon involve over 10,000 people from 100 different agencies, including volunteers, engineers, and military personnel from multiple countries. For the first 9 days, search teams battled extreme conditions. Visibility underwater was almost zero, and many passages were so tight that divers had to remove their air tanks to squeeze through. The cave floor was uneven, with sudden drops and sharp turns, and the floodwater was cold enough to sap strength quickly. On July 2nd, after days of painstaking effort, British divers John Valanthan and Rick Stanton, navigating one submerged section after another, surfaced into an air-filled chamber far inside the cave. Shining their lights forward, they found all 12 boys and their coach alive. Thin, pale, and exhausted, but alive. The relief was immediate, but so was the realization. Finding them was only the first step. Now came the challenge of getting them out. The route back was long and treacherous, over 4 kilometers of flooded passages, some barely wider than a person's shoulders. The boys had no diving experience, and panic underwater could be fatal. The rescue team considered waiting months for the floodwaters to recede, bringing food and supplies to keep the group alive in the meantime. But oxygen levels in the chamber were already dropping, and heavy rains were forecast again. Time was running out. A daring plan was devised. Each boy would be fitted with a full-face diving mask, connected to an air supply, and accompanied by 2 divers, one in front, one behind, guiding them through the submerged passages. The boys would be sedated lightly to prevent panic, keeping them calm during the long, claustrophobic journey. On July 8th, the operation began. Divers navigated the twisting route slowly, carefully maneuvering the boys through flooded choke points. It took hours for each rescue trip. By the end of the first day, 4 boys had been brought out alive. On July 9th, another 4 followed. On July 10th, the final 4 boys and their coach were extracted, marking the end of one of the most complex and high-risk cave rescues in history. The joy was tempered by tragedy. Thai Navy SEAL Saman Kunan, who had volunteered for the mission, lost his life on July 6th while delivering oxygen tanks to the trapped group. His death was a sobering reminder of the dangers involved and the extraordinary bravery required for such an operation. In the days following the rescue, the world celebrated the teamwork, skill, and courage that had saved 13 lives from what could have been certain death. The Tam Luang Cave Rescue became a story of hope against overwhelming odds, a moment when people from all over the globe came together for a single purpose and succeeded. Weatherly Well Rescue. It was February 11th in Weatherly Well, Tennessee, the kind of winter day where the air clung to the skin, heavy and damp. 4 experienced cavers, James Lewis, Alan England, Daryl Moore, and Jerry Olson, met that morning for an exploration. Olson, a seasoned ridge walker, had recently stumbled upon a new cave entrance on one of his solitary hikes. New caves were rare, and this one, though small, carried a tantalizing sense of the unknown. When they reached the site, the entrance hardly looked inviting. It was little more than a slot in the earth, barely 9 inches wide. The opening slanted downward for about 4 feet, before dropping 7 feet into what appeared to be a larger passage. It was a natural choke point, a place that tested a caver's nerve before they'd even seen the inside. Only Alan England was small enough to attempt it. Wiry and lean, he sized up the gap as the others looked on. Tying a rope for safety and to use as a handline, he took a breath, positioned himself, and slid into the slot. The cool, damp limestone pressed against his ribs and shoulders. Moisture slicked the surface, but gravity made the entry easy. Exhaling to shrink himself slightly, he eased downward and slipped through. Below, he dropped the 7 feet into a narrow but slightly more open space. The air was still, with a faint scent of damp earth. Ahead, a 10-foot drop beckoned. Using the rope again, he descended and found a small passage winding deeper. His headlamp beam slid over the walls and into the unknown. Experienced as he was, England knew the unspoken rule. If the terrain demands technical rope work, you don't push forward alone. He paused, letting the silence press in around him. There would be other days, with more people, more gear. He turned back toward the entrance. The 10-foot climb was easy. Soon he stood below the narrow slot, looking up at the way he'd come in. That's when he realized the problem. Gravity had helped him slide down. Now, against gravity, he had to lift himself through a constricted opening. The rock was wet, offering no friction in his favor. He tried once, twisting and wriggling, but couldn't find the angle. The stone gripped his chest and shoulders, refusing to give. He tried again, his muscles straining, but the slick limestone turned every effort into a slow slide back down. Sweat mixed with the cold dampness of his clothes. Outside, the others crouched by the entrance, offering encouragement and advice. They tugged gently on the rope, but the awkward angle meant they couldn't apply real pulling force without risking injury. The slot became a trap, tight enough to hold him, too narrow for assistance from below. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. England's clothes were soaked from the rock's moisture. Winter's chill began to leach away his body heat. He was tiring, his movements slowing, his mind working harder to focus. The signs of hypothermia were creeping in. The group faced a decision. They'd hoped to solve the problem themselves, but time was running out. Lewis and Olson volunteered to go for help. The 2 men hiked back to Olson's home, cold air burning their lungs, and called the East Tennessee Cave Rescue Team. By the time rescuers arrived, roughly 2 hours later, England was still in the cave, wrapped in extra clothing they'd managed to pass down to him. Warm food and hot drinks helped fight the chill. His body temperature began to recover, but the psychological strain was harder to shake. The rescue team worked methodically. They experimented with rope rigging, tested hauling angles, and considered every move before acting. The goal wasn't just to pull him out, it was to do so without wedging him tighter or causing injury. The confined space allowed only limited movement, requiring careful coordination and constant communication. After about an hour of steady work, progress came. Using a blend of hauling from above, precise body positioning, and England's own effort, they got his shoulders through the slot. Once that hurdle was cleared, the rest of his body followed more easily. He emerged into the cold winter air, pale, chilled, but able to stand and walk unassisted. The ordeal had lasted 5 hours from the moment he first slid into the cave. Later, England reflected on the experience. The ease of entry had deceived him. Gravity had made the way in simple, masking the difficulty of climbing out. The narrow slot had also limited his ability to use ascenders, climbing devices that could have helped. And with no room for another caver to assist from below, his situation had depended entirely on the team above. It was a lesson every caver understands but sometimes forgets. The path in is not always the path out, and every squeeze must be judged both ways before committing. Johann Westhauser Rescue. The Riesending Cave, aptly meaning giant thing in German, lies hidden in the Bavarian Alps near Berchtesgaden. It is Germany's deepest cave, plunging over 1,000 meters beneath the surface. A twisting network of vertical shafts, tight squeezes, and underground streams. Even veteran cavers approach it with caution, knowing that any accident here would be a logistical nightmare. In June 2014, 3 experienced cavers ventured into Riesending for a long expedition. Among them was Johann Westhauser, 52, a physicist from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and one of the men who had helped map the cave. To him, its challenges were familiar. Several days in, disaster struck. While the team moved through a narrow vertical shaft deep underground, a sudden rock fall broke loose from above. A fist-sized stone crashed down and struck Westhauser on the head. His helmet absorbed part of the impact, but the blow left him disoriented, slow to speak, and sluggish in movement. Clear signs of a serious head injury. They were more than 1,000 meters below the surface, with the only way out involving multiple vertical ascents, tight crawls, and long traverses. The route was not only exhausting, but also treacherous for a patient in Westhauser's condition. One teammate stayed with him to administer first aid, while the other began the long climb out to call for help. A journey that would take hours. When the alarm reached the surface, rescue teams realized the scale of the challenge. Extracting an injured man from such a depth would require one of the largest cave rescues ever attempted. Specialists from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, and Croatia mobilized, hauling thousands of kilograms of equipment to the remote mountain entrance. Inside, rescuers reached Westhauser, stabilized him, and secured him in a specially designed stretcher. Moving him was painstakingly slow. In wider sections, teams could work more quickly, but in tight squeezes, they had to dismantle rigging, maneuver the stretcher through awkward bends, then rebuild the hauling systems on the other side. The cave's vertical drops demanded elaborate pulley setups to lift him safely. In many shafts, rescuers had to climb ahead, set anchors, and coordinate lifts from above and below. Water-filled passages added to the danger, their freezing temperatures sapping energy from everyone. Progress was measured in meters, not hours. To prevent exhaustion, rescuers established underground bivouacs, temporary camps stocked with medical supplies, food, and sleeping gear, so teams could rotate in shifts. Westhauser was regularly assessed at each stage to ensure he remained stable. News of the operation spread worldwide. At the surface, Sarkinishti as a Satgas trends. Journalists gathered near the entrance, broadcasting updates. Helicopters ferried supplies to the site, while engineers set up underground communication lines so medics below could coordinate with the surface in real time. More than 700 people supported the mission, though only about 200 entered the cave. The rest handled logistics, transport, and scheduling. Every detail had to be precise. There was no margin for mistakes. Over days, the stretcher inched upward. Each narrow slot, each vertical shaft was its own battle. In some passages, rescuers could work side by side. In others, only one could fit, passing the stretcher hand over hand. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks, the rescue team emerged from the cave on June 19, 2014. Westhauser, pale but alert, was carried into the daylight and transferred to a waiting helicopter. He was flown to a hospital in Traunstein, where doctors confirmed a serious head injury, but expected a full recovery. The operation was hailed as one of Europe's most complex cave rescues, a triumph of international cooperation, endurance, and technical skill. For many of the rescuers, it was also a simple matter of principle. As one Austrian caver put it afterward, "You never leave someone behind in the dark." Survival isn't about strength alone. It's about solidarity. When we're underwater, underground, or out of options, sometimes the only way out is through every hand willing to pull. If these rescues left you holding your breath, hit like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales of human grit in the world's most extreme rescues. Let's keep shining light where the darkness scares us most, because that's where hope lives.